Might the Dead Sea Scrolls be generations older than previously believed? And if so, what implications would that have for us today? Stay tuned to find out.
Written in historical records, documented in Tacitus and Josephus. For those who don't believe us, check the marks of architecture written on a fetus. Neural nets and error correcting codes complete us.
What are the Dead Sea Scrolls? So the Dead Sea Scrolls were a group of manuscripts that were found in Qumran between 1946 and 1956. They were found in a cave, or in caves, plural, in jars. And what these were well-preserved manuscripts of the Old Testament and other early Jewish documents, right? And so prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we only had manuscripts dating from much later for the Old Testament. So for example, we had the Masoretic set of texts, which dated to about the Middle Ages. There was question if the original Old Testament books were written before the time of Christ, and the earliest copies we had were from around, let's say, 1000 AD, Common Era. That is a big gap. And it is a gap that invited skepticism. So people would say, like the game of telephone, the manuscripts have been changed over time. So you have no idea what was originally in Isaiah. Yes, Isaiah 53 looks like a messianic prophecy, but who knows when it was written? It could have been written at a much later date. So there's evidence against that, right? So we have, for example, the Septuagint translation, which predates the time of Christ for many of the translated parts. But still, there was still doubt. And so the discovery of the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, it showed us first century and even earlier manuscripts of the Old Testament. So in other words, what was the Old Testament like at the time of Christ? What text did Jesus have access to? And so these texts were themselves representative of the text that Jesus would have had in his day. So why is this important? If it's the case that we can date these manuscripts to even earlier dates, that means that we can be even more sure of the reliable transmission of Scripture prior to the copies that we have. Because it would mean that when we compare something like the great Isaiah scroll to the text that we have today, we can see in what ways were they changed, in what ways were any of the changes relevant, right? Because there could be small changes, there could be, words spelled different, etc. But do any of the changes actually make a difference to theology, right? Or are they relatively intact, right? So this actually could be increased evidence of the reliability of the transmission process of the Scriptures, and by extension, the reliability of the copies of the Scriptures we have today. Okay, so to the research. So there was a researcher, Mladen Popovic, from the University of Groningen, and this researcher used AI methods, particularly machine learning methods, right? Bayesian ridge regression, to correlate carbon-14 dates with handwriting styles. And when I say handwriting styles, I don't mean the style of words used. It literally means the shape of the letters. Because as you may well know, the way that we write letters changes over time. So to give an example from American history, if you read really old manuscripts of things from around the time of the founding of the country, you'll notice that it looks like there are F's in places where there shouldn't be F's, there should be S's. And that's because S's were originally written in some sense, or in some instances, as what look like F's, right? It's a little bit weird to read those documents, but once you make that connection, you say, oh, okay, so that if I see a document where there are F's in places of S's, then that allows me in some sense to know this is around the late 1700s, early 1800s perhaps. Okay, so they did the same thing, but with manuscripts from Qumran. So they took samples of the manuscripts, carbon dated them to get a date range, and then they extracted features using machine learning from the handwriting styles, right? And so the way that certain letters were written in Hebrew, they got features from that. Then they correlated these using machine learning methods to train a system, which they called Enoch, right? And this Enoch system was then able, through cross-validation, to test, based on the handwriting alone, what is an age range. And for those manuscripts where they have the carbon-14 dating, they could actually see if these correlate fairly well. And what they found is that of 135 manuscripts that they tested, around 79% of them actually gave reasonable dates. And they determined the reasonable dates in kind of post hoc paleographic analysis. Okay. This is exciting because it gives us another way of potentially dating ancient text. Some of the findings that they had were that the dates were generally older than had been previously believed based on paleographic evidence alone, right? So people looking at when certain words were used or maybe certain flourishes, etc. So this actually gave dates that pushed back when we would think of as the original origination date range for these manuscripts on the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Furthermore, they were able to push some of these back to, for example, 200 BCE. The date range is earlier than that, right? So these are roughly 200 years for at least some of the manuscripts that they tested before the time of Christ, right? That's exciting. So they also looked at the Great Isaiah Scroll, and they found that while it looks to be the work of two different scribes, those scribes are predicted to have written in the same time period. So it's not as if one of the scribes wrote part of the manuscript, the first half, and then hundreds of years later, another scribe added to it. This would have been two people writing in roughly the same time period, okay? Which was dated to about between 180 and 100 BCE. Okay, so this is very exciting. The fact that we know what was in Isaiah 100 or 200 years before the time of Christ, and this includes messianic prophecies about Jesus. So we know what was in the prophecies, and we see the fulfillment in the biographies, the 4 biographies we have of the Gospels, in addition to the other extra-biblical testament to the life and doings of Christ, right? So the case is only getting stronger. There are some caveats, of course, to this research. So I will put a link below to the actual research paper. And so you could look through it if it's something that's up your alley. Some of the concerns are the sample sizes were pretty small in terms of the machine learning training data. So this is on the order of dozens of manuscripts, whereas for robust learning methods, we typically like to have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of records to train on. But in this case, the authors were aware of that deficiency, and they actually built into their methods ways of counteracting that. Furthermore, using cross-validation, they showed that this was actually still a reliable method of obtaining dates for manuscripts where they had the carbon-14 dating, so they can kind of cross-correlate with that. Okay, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what comes next for this. And so hopefully I'll keep you up to date on future developments, but feel free to check out the links below if this interests you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. That helps the channel. It helps me know that the things that I'm sharing with you are actually resonating with this audience. And so feel free to do that. And also let me know if there's anything you would like me to make videos on, any aspect of apologetics, science, AI, machine learning, etc. I'm here for it. All right, see you. There was a researcher, Mladen Popovic, at the University of Groningen. Groningen? Okay, so this is research by a researcher named Mladen Popovic at the University of Groningen. I'm going to say it wrong.